Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we will be finishing up our look at Thomas Paine's famous pamphlet, Common Sense. And again, we know this was part of the influence, one of the great influential minds of the time, and this is considered one of the larger portions of reading if you want to get an understanding of the feelings of many people in the US. But we will finish it off today, and as always, we'll do a full reading first and then kind of a review. So, this is named Of the Present Ability of America, with some miscellaneous reflections. I have never met a man, either in England or America, who hath not confessed his opinion that a separation between the countries would take place one time or other. And there is no instance in which we have shown less judgment than in endeavoring to describe what we call the ripeness or fitness of the continent for independence. As all men allow the measure, and vary only in their opinion of the time, let us, in order to remove mistakes, take a general survey of things, and endeavor, if possible, to find out the very time. But I need not go far. The inquiry ceases at once, for the time hath found us. The general occurrence, the glorious union of all things, proves the fact. 'Tis not in numbers, but in unity that our great strength lies. Yet our present numbers are sufficient to repel the force of all the world. The continent hath at this time the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven, and is just arrived at that pitch of strength in which no single colony is able to support itself, and the whole, when united, is able to do anything. Our land is more than sufficient, and as to naval affairs, we cannot be insensible that Britain would never suffer an American man of war to be built, while the continent remained in their hands. Wherefore, we should be no forwarder an 100 years hence in that branch than we are now. But the truth is, we should be less so, because the timber of the country is every day diminishing, and that which will remain at last will be far off or difficult to procure. Were the continent crowded with inhabitants, her sufferings under the present circumstances would be intolerable. The more seaport towns we had, the more should we have both to defend and to lose. Our present numbers are so happily proportioned to our wants that no man need be idle. The diminution of trade affords an army, and the necessities of an army create a new trade. Debts we have none, and whatever we may contract on this account will serve as a glorious memento of our virtue. Can we but leave posterity with a settled form of government, an independent constitution of its own, the purchase at any price will be cheap. But to expend millions for the sake of getting a few vile acts repealed and routing the present ministry only is unworthy the charge, and is using posterity with the utmost cruelty, because it is leaving them with the great work to do, and a debt upon their backs from which they derive no advantage. Such a thought's unworthy a man of honor, and is the true characteristic of a narrow heart with a piddling politician. The debt we may contract doth not deserve our regard, if the work be but accomplished. No nation ought to be without a debt. A national debt is a national bond, and when it bears no interest and is in no case a grievance, it is in no case a grievance. Britain is oppressed with a debt upwards of 140 millions sterling, for which she pays upwards of 4 millions interest. And as a compensation for her debt, she has a large navy. America is without a debt and without a navy. Yet for the 20th part of the English national debt could have a navy as large again. The Navy of England is not worth at this time more than 3.5 millions sterling. The first and second editions of this pamphlet were published without the following calculations, which are now given as a proof that the above estimation of the Navy is a just one. See Entick's Naval History intro on page 56 of that book. The charge of building a ship of each rate and furnishing her with masts, yards, sails, and rigging, together with a proportion of 8 months' boatswains and carpenters' sea stores, as calculated by Mr. Burchett, Secretary to the Navy. For a ship of 100 guns, it cost 35,553. And he goes down the line for 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. And the cost, 90 is 29,886, 80 is 23,638, 70 is 17,785, 60 is 14,197, 50 is 10,606, 40 is 7,558, 30 is 5,846, and 20 is 3,710. And hence it is easy to sum up the value, or cost, rather, of the whole British Navy, which in the year 1757, when it was at its greatest glory, consisted of the following ships and guns. It had 6 ships, of which it had 100 guns, the cost of one of which was 35,553. And the cost for all of those put together was 213,318. And it goes down 12 ships of 90 guns, 12 ships of 80 guns, 43 ships of 70 guns, 35 ships of 60 guns, 40 ships of 50 guns, 45 of 40 guns, and 58 of 20 guns. He gives the individual cost and then the cost of all. And then he goes 85 sloops, bombs, and fire ships, one with another at 2,000, which altogether cost 170,000. Altogether, the entire cost of that navy was 3,266,786. Remains for guns, 233,214. And the total spent is 3,500,000. I'm assuming this is all in pounds sterling, because it does have the British pound symbol. So, no country on the globe is so happily situated or so internally capable of raising a fleet as America. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage are her natural produce. We need go abroad for nothing. Whereas the Dutch, who make large profits by hiring out their ships of war to the Spaniards and Portuguese, are obliged to import most of the materials they use. We ought to view the building a fleet as an article of commerce, it being the natural manufactory of this country. 'Tis the best money we can lay out. A navy, when finished, is worth more than it cost. And it is that nice point in national policy in which the commerce and protection are united. Let us build. If we want them not, we can sell, and by that means replace our paper currency with ready gold and silver. In point of manning a fleet, people in general run into great errors. It is not necessary that 1/4 should be sailors. The terrible privateer Captain Death stood the hottest engagement of any ship last war, yet had not 20 sailors on board, though her complement of men was upwards of 200. A few able and social sailors will soon instruct a sufficient number of active landsmen in the common work of a ship. Wherefore we never can be more capable of beginning on maritime matters than now, while our timber is standing, our fisheries blocked up, and our sailors and shipwrights out of employ. Men of war of 70 and 80 guns were built 40 years ago in New England. And why not the same now? Shipbuilding in America is America's greatest pride, and in which she will, in time, excel the whole world. The great empires of the East are mainly inland, and consequently excluded from the possibility of rivaling her. Africa is in a state of barbarism, and no power in Europe hath either such an extent of coast, or such an internal supply of materials. Where nature hath given the one, she hath withheld the other. To America only hath she been liberal to both. The vast empire of Russia is almost shut out from the sea, wherefore her boundless forests, her tar, iron, and cordage are only articles of commerce. In point of safety, we ought we to be without a fleet? We are not a little people now, which we were 60 years ago. At that time, we might have trusted our property in the streets, or fields rather, and slept securely without locks or bolts to our doors and windows. The case is now altered, and our methods of defense ought to improve with our increase of property. A common pirate 12 months ago might have come up the Delaware and laid the city of Philadelphia under contribution for what sum he pleased, and the same might have happened in other places. Nay, my daring fellow, in a brig of 14 or 16 guns, might have robbed the whole continent and carried off $500,000 of money. These are circumstances which demand our attention, and point out the necessity of naval protection. Some perhaps will say that after we made up with Britain, she will protect us. Can they be so unwise as to mean that she will keep a navy in our harbors for that purpose? Common sense will tell us that the power which hath endeavored to subdue us is of all others the most improper to defend us. Conquest may be effected under the pretense of friendship, and ourselves, after a long and brave resistance, be at last cheated into slavery. And if her ships are not to be admitted into our harbors, I would ask, how long is she going to protect us? A navy 3,000 or 4,000 miles off can be of little use, and on sudden emergencies, none at all. Wherefore, if we must hereafter protect ourselves, why not do it for ourselves? Why do it for another? The English list of ships of war is long and formidable, but not a tenth part of them are at any time fit for service. Numbers of them are not in being, yet their names are pompously continued in the list. If only a plank be left of the ship, and not a fifth part of such as are fit for service, can be spared at any one station at one time. The East and West Indies, Mediterranean, Africa, and other parts, over which Britain extends her claim, make large demands upon her navy. From a mixture of prejudice and inattention, we have contracted a false notion respecting the Navy of England, and have talked as if we should have the whole of it to encounter at once, and for that reason suppose that we must have one as large, which, not being instantly practicable, has been made use of by a set of disguised Tories to discourage for beginning thereon. Nothing can be further from the truth than this. For if America had only a 20th part of the naval force of Britain, she would be by far an overmatch for her. Because as neither have nor claim any foreign dominion, our whole force would be employed on our own coast, where we should, in the long run, have 2-to-1 the advantage of those who had 3,000 to 4,000 miles to sail over before they could attack us, and the same distance to return in order to refit and recruit. And although Britain, by her fleet, hath a check over our trade to Europe, we have as large a one over her trade to the West Indies, which, by laying in the neighborhood of the continent, lies entirely at its mercy. Some method might be fallen on to keep up a naval force in time of peace, if we should judge it necessary to support a constant navy. If premiums were to be given to merchants to build and employ in their service ships mounted with 20, 30, 40, or 50 guns, the premiums to be in proportion to the loss of bulk to the merchant, 50 or 60 of those ships, without a few guard ships on constant duty, would keep up a sufficient navy, and without burdening ourselves with the evils so loudly complained of in England, or suffering their fleet in time of peace to lie rotting in the docks. To unite the sinews of commerce and defense is sound policy, for when our strength and our riches play into each other's hands, we need fear no external enemy. In almost every article of defense we abound. Hemp flourishes even to rankness, so that we need not want cordage. Our iron is superior to that of other countries. Our small arms equal to any in the world. Cannon we can cast at pleasure. Saltpeter and gunpowder we are every day producing. Our knowledge is hourly improving. Resolution is our inherent character, and courage hath never yet forsaken us. Wherefore, what is it that we want? Why is it that we hesitate? From Britain we can expect nothing but ruin. If she is once admitted to the government of America again, this continent will not be worth living in. Jealousies will be always arising. Insurrections will be constantly happening. And who will go forth to quell them? Who will venture his life to reduce his own countrymen to a foreign obedience? The difference between Pennsylvania and Connecticut, respecting some unlocated lands, shows the insignificance of a British government and fully proves that nothing but continental authority can regulate continental matters. Another reason why the present time is preferable to all others is that the fewer our numbers are, the more land there is yet unoccupied, which instead of being lavished by the king on his worthless dependents, may be hereafter applied not only to the discharge of the present debt, but to the constant support of government. No nation under heaven hath such an advantage as this. The infant state of the colonies, as it is called, so far from being against, is an argument in favor of independence. We are sufficiently numerous, and were we more or so, we might be less united. 'Tis a matter worthy of observation that the more a country is peopled, the smaller their armies are. In military numbers, the ancients far exceeded the moderns, and the reason is evident. For trade being the consequence of population, men came too much absorbed thereby to attend to anything else. Commerce diminishes the spirit both of patriotism and military defense. And history sufficiently informs us that the bravest achievements were always accomplished in the non-age of a nation. When the increase of commerce, England hath lost its spirit. With the increase of commerce, England has lost its spirit. The city of London, notwithstanding its numbers, submits to continued insults with the patience of a coward. The more men have to lose, the less willing they are to venture. The rich are in general times the rich are in general slaves to fear, and submit to courtly power and the trembling duplicity of a spaniel. Youth is the seed time of good habits as well in nations as in individuals. It might be difficult, if not impossible, to form the continent into one government half a century hence. The vast variety of interests occasioned by an increase of trade and population would create confusion. Colony would be against colony. Each being able would scorn each other's assistance. And while the proud and foolish gloried in their little distinctions, the wise would lament that the Union had not been formed before. Wherefore the present time is the true time for establishing it. The intimacy which is contracted in infancy, and the friendship which is formed in misfortune, are of all others the most lasting and unalterable. Our present union is marked with both these characters. We are young and we have been distressed, but our concord hath withstood our troubles, and fixes a memorable era for posterity to glory in. The present time, likewise, is that peculiar time which never happens to a nation but once, viz., the time of forming itself into a government. The nations have let slip the opportunity, and by that means have been compelled to receive laws from their conquerors instead of making laws for themselves. First, they had a king, and then a form of government. Whereas the articles or charter of government should be formed first, and then delegated to execute them afterwards. But from the heirs of other nations, let us learn wisdom, and lay hold on to the present opportunity to begin government at the right end. When William the Conqueror subdued England, he gave them law at the point of the sword, and until the consent that the seat of government in America be legally and authoritatively occupied, we shall be in danger of having it filled by some fortunate ruffian who may treat us in the same manner. And then, where will be our freedom? Where our property? As to religion, I hold it to be the indispensable duty of government to protect all conscientious professors thereof, and I know of no other business which government hath to do therewith. Let a man throw aside that narrowness of soul, that selfishness of principle, which the niggards of all professions are so unwilling to part with, and he will be once delivered of his fears on that head. Suspicion is the companion of mean souls, and the bane of all good society. For myself, I fully and conscientiously believe that it is the will of the Almighty that there should be diversity of religious opinions among us. It affords a larger field for our Christian kindness, were we all of one way of thinking. Our religious dispositions would won't matter for probation. And on this liberal principle, I took on the various denominations among us to be like children of the same family, differing only in what we called their Christian names. In page 97, I threw out a few thoughts on the propriety of a continental charter, for I only presume to offer hints, not plans. And in this place, I take the liberty of rementioning the subject, by observing that a charter is to be understood as a bond of solemn obligation, which the whole enters into, to support the right of every separate part, whether the religion, professional freedom, or property. A firm bargain and a right reckoning make long friends. I have heretofore likewise mentioned the necessity of a large and equal representation, and there is no political matter which more deserves our attention. A small number of electors or a small number of representatives are equally dangerous. But if the number of representatives be not only small, but unequal, the danger is increased. As an instance of this, I mention the following. When the petition of the associators was before the House of Assembly of Pennsylvania, 28 members only were present. All the Bucks County members, being 8, voted against it, and had 7 of the Chester members done the same, the whole province had been governed by 2 counties only. And this danger it is always exposed to. The unwarrantable stretch, likewise, which that House made in their last sitting to gain an undue authority over the delegates of that province, ought to warn the people at large how they trust power out of their own hands. A set of instructions for their delegates were put together, which in point of sense and business would have dishonored a schoolboy, and after being approved by a very few, without doors, were carried into the House, and there passed in behalf of the whole colony. Whereas, did the whole colony know with what ill will that House had entered on some unnecessary public measures, they would not hesitate a moment to think them unworthy of such a trust. Immediate necessity makes many things convenient, which, if continued, would grow into oppressions. Expedience and right are different things. When the calamities of America required a consultation, there was no method so ready, or at that time so proper, as to appoint persons from the several houses of assembly for that purpose. And the wisdom with which they have proceeded hath preserved this continent from ruin. But as it is more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress, every well-wisher to good must own that the mode for choosing members of the body deserves consideration. And I put it as a question to those who make a study of mankind, whether representation and election is not too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess. When we are planning for posterity, we ought to remember that virtue is not hereditary. It is from our enemies that we often gain excellent maxims, and are frequently surprised into reason by their mistakes. Mr. Cornwall, one of the Lords of the Treasury, treated the petitions of the New York Assembly with contempt, because that house, he said, consisted but of 26 members, which trifling number, he argued, could not with decency be put forth for the whole. We thank him in this involuntary honesty. To conclude, however strange it may appear to some, or however unwilling they may be to think so, matters not. But many strong and striking reasons may be given to show that nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration of independence, some of which are first, it is the custom of nations when any two are at war for some other powers not engaged in the quarrel to step in as mediators and bring about the preliminaries of peace. But while America calls herself the subject of Great Britain, no power, however well disposed she may be, can offer her mediation. Wherefore, in our present state, we may quarrel on forever. Secondly, it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any kind of assistance, if we mean only to make use of that assistance for the purpose of repairing the breach and strengthening the connection between Britain and America, because those powers would be sufferers by the consequences. Thirdly, while we profess ourselves the subjects of Britain, we must, in the eyes of foreign nations, be considered as rebels. The precedent is somewhat dangerous to their peace. For men to be in arms under the name of subjects, we, on the spot, can solve the paradox. But to unite resistance and subjection requires an ideal much too refined for common understanding. Fourthly, We have a manifesto to be published and dispatched to foreign courts, setting forth the miseries we have endured and the peaceful methods which we have ineffectually used for their redress, declaring at the same time that not being able longer to live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the British court, we had been driven to the necessity of breaking off all connections with her, at the same time assuring all such courts of our peaceable disposition towards them, and of our desire of entering into trade with them. Such a memorial would produce more good effects to this continent than if a ship were freighted with petitions to Britain. Under our under our present denomination of British subjects, we can neither be received nor heard abroad. The custom of all courts is against us, and will be so until an independence we take rank with other nations. These proceedings may at first seem strange and difficult, but like other steps which we have already passed over, will in little time become familiar and agreeable. And until an independence is declared, the continent will itself feel like a man who continues putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to set about it, wishes it over, and is continually haunted with the thoughts of its necessity. And that was that portion of the presentability of America and some miscellaneous reflections, which brings us to a final portion that is just an appendix. We add appendix to the third edition. So this is just more or less Paine's notes on the third edition of this pamphlet.
It's not long, so I'll read through it. It's still a little bit of length, but it's not near as long as the other ones. Appendix to the third edition. Since the publication of the first edition of this pamphlet, or rather on the same day on which it came out, the King's speech made its appearance in this city. Had the spirit of prophecy directed the birth of this production, it could not have brought it forth at a more seasonable juncture, or at a more necessary time. The bloody mindedness of the one shows the necessity of pursuing the doctrine of the other. Men read by way of revenge, and the speech, instead of terrifying, prepared a way for the many principles of independence. Ceremony, and even silence, from whatever motives may arise, have a hurtful tendency when they give the least degree of countenance to base and wicked performances. Wherefore, if this maxim be admitted, it naturally follows that the king's speech is being a piece of finished villainy, deserved and still deserves a general execration both by the Congress and the people. Yet, as the domestic tranquility of a nation depends greatly on the chastity of what might properly be called national manners, it is often better to pass some things over in silent disdain than to make use of such new methods of dislike as might introduce the least innovation on that the guardian of our peace and safety. And perhaps it is chiefly owing to this prudent delicacy that the king's speech hath not before now suffered a public execution. The speech, if it may be called one, is nothing better than a wilful, audacious libel against the truth, the common good, and the existence of mankind, and is a formal and pompous method of offering up human sacrifices to the pride of tyrants. But this general massacre of mankind is one of the privileges and the certain consequences of kings. For as nature knows them not, they know not her. And although they are beings of our own creating, they know not us, and are become the gods of their creators. The speech hath one good quality, which is that it is not calculated to deceive. Neither can we, even if we would, be deceived by it. Brutality and tyranny appear on the face of it. It leaves us at no loss, and every life convinces, even in the moment of reading, that he who hunts the woods for prey, the naked and untutored Indian, is less savage than the King of Britain. Sir John Dalrymple, a putative father of a whining Jesuitical peace, fallaciously called the address of the people of England to the inhabitants of America, hath perhaps a vain supposition that the people here were to be frightened at the pomp and description of a king, given, though very unwisely on his part, the real character of the present one. But, says this writer, if you are inclined to pay compliments to an administration which we do not complain of, meaning the Marquis of Rockingham's at the repeal of the Stamp Act, it is very unfair if you to withhold from them that prince by whose nod alone they were permitted to do anything. This is Toryism with a witness. Here is idolatry even without a mask. And he who can calmly hear and digest such doctrine hath forfeited his claim to rationality and apostate from the order of manhood, and ought to be considered as one who hath not only given up his proper dignity of man, but sunk himself beneath the rank of animals, not and contemptibly crawls through the world like a worm. However, it matters very little now that the King of England either says or does. He hath wickedly broken through every moral and human obligation, trampled nature and conscience beneath his feet, and by a steady and constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty procured for himself an universal hatred. It is now the interest of America to provide for herself. She hath already a large and young family, whom it is more her duty to take care of than to be granting away her property to support a power who is become a reproach to the names of men and to Christians, whose office is to watch the morals of a nation, of whatsoever sect or denomination ye are of, as well as ye who are more immediately the guardians of the public liberty. If ye wish to preserve your native country uncontaminated by European corruption, ye must in secret wish a separation, but leaving the moral part to private reflection, I shall chiefly confine the further remarks to the following heads. First, that it is the interest of America to be separated by Britain. Secondly, which is the easiest and most practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. In support of the first, I could, if I judged it proper, produce the opinion of some of the ablest and most experienced men on this continent, and whose settlements on that head are not yet publicly known. It is in reality a self-evident position for no nation in a state of foreign dependence, limited in its commerce, and cramped and fettered in its legislative powers, can ever arrive at any material eminence. America doth not yet know what opulence is, and although the progress which she hath made stands unparalleled in the history of other nations, it is but childhood compared with what she would be capable of arriving at, had she, as she ought to have, the legislative powers in her own hands. England is at this time proudly coveting what would do her no good were she to accomplish it, and the continent hesitating on a matter which will be her final ruin if neglected. It is the commerce and not the conquest of America by which England is to be benefited, and that would in a greater measure continue were the countries as independent of each other as France and Spain, because of specious errors of those who speak without reflecting. And among the many which I have heard, the following seems the most general, viz., that had this rupture happened 40 or 50 years hence, instead of now, the continent would have been more able to have shaken off the dependence. To which I reply that our military ability at this time arises from the experience gained in the last war, and which in 40 or 50 years' time would be totally extinct. The continent would not, by that time, have a quitrent reserved thereon, will always lessen, and in time will wholly support the yearly expense of government. It matters not how long the debt is in paying, so that the lands, when sowed, be applied to the discharge of it, and for the execution of which the Congress for the time being will be the continental trustees. I proceed now to the second head, viz., which is the easiest and most practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. Whew. He who takes nature for his guide is not easily beaten out of his argument. And on that ground, I answer generally that independence, being a single simple line contained within ourselves, and reconciliation, a matter exceedingly perplexed and complicated, in which a treacherous, capricious court is to interfere, gives the answer without a doubt. The present state of America is truly alarming to every man who is capable of reflection. Without law, without government, without any other mode of power than what is founded on and granted by courtesy, held together by an unexampled occurrence of sentiment, which is nonetheless subject to change, and which every secret enemy is endeavoring to dissolve. Our present condition is legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, a constitution without dependence. A constitution without a name. And what is strangely astonishing, perfect independence contending for dependence. The instance is without a precedent. The case never existed before, and who can tell what may be the event? The property of no man is secure in the present unbraced system of things. The mind of the multitude is left at random, and seeing no fixed object before them, they pursued such as fancy or opinion presents. Nothing is criminal. There is no such thing as treason. Wherefore everyone thinks himself at liberty to act as he pleases. The act were forfeited to the laws of the states. Sorry, I skipped a line again. See, pleases. The Tories would not have dared to assemble offensively, and they known that their lives, by that act, were forfeited to the laws of the state. A line of distinction should be drawn between English soldiers taken in battle and inhabitants of America taken in arms. The first are prisoners, but the latter traitors. The one forfeits his liberty, the other his head. Notwithstanding our wisdom, there is a visible feebleness in some of our proceedings which gives encouragement to dissensions. The continental belt is too loosely buckled, and if something is not done in time, it will be too late to do anything, and we shall fall into a state in which neither reconciliation nor independence will be practicable. The king and his worthless adherents are got at their old game of dividing the continent, and there are not wanting among us printers who will be busy in spreading specious falsehoods. The artful and hypocritical letter which appeared a few months ago in two of the New York papers, and likewise in two others, is an evidence that there are men who want both judgment and honesty. It is easy getting into holes and corners and talking of reconciliation, but do such men consider how difficult the task is, and how dangerous it may prove should the continent divide thereon? Do they take within their view all the various orders of men whose situation and circumstances, as well as their own, are to be considered therein? Do they put themselves in the place of the sufferer, whose all is already gone, and of the soldier, who hath quitted all for the defense of his country? If their ill-judged moderation be suited to their own private situations only, regardless of others, the event will convince them that they are reckoning without their host. Put us, say some, on the footing we were in the year 1763. To which I answer, the request is not now the power of Britain to comply with, neither will she propose it. But if it were, and when should be granted, I ask as a reasonable question, By what means is such a corrupt and faithless court to be kept to its engagements? Another parliament? Nay, even the present and faithless, even the present may hereafter repeal the obligation on the pretense of its being violently obtained or not wisely granted. And in that case, where is our redress? No going to law with nations. Cannon are the barristers of crowns, and the sword, not of justice, but of war, decides the suit. To be on the footing of 1763, it is not sufficient that the laws only be put in the same state, but that our circumstances likewise be put in the same state. Our burnt and destroyed towns repaired or built up, our private losses made good, our public debts contracted for defense discharged. Otherwise, we shall be millions worse than we were at that enviable period. Such a request, had it been compelled with a year ago, would have won the heart and soul of the continent. But now is too late. The Rubicon is past. Besides, the taking up arms merely to enforce the repeal of a pecuniary law seems as unwarrantable by the divine law as repugnant to human feelings as the taking up arms to enforce obedience thereto. The object on either side doth not justify the means, for the lives of men are too valuable to be cast away on such trifles. It is the violence which is done and threatened to our persons, the destruction of our property by an armed force, the invasion of our country by fire and sword, which conscientiously qualifies the use of arms. And the instant in which some such mode of defense became necessary, all subjection to Britain ought to have ceased, and the independence of America should have been considered as dating its era from and published by the first musket that was fired against her. This line is a line of consistency, drawn neither by caprice nor extended by ambition, but produced by a chain of events of which the colonies were not the authors. I shall conclude these remarks with the following timely and well-intended hints. We ought to reflect that there are three different ways by which an independency may hereafter be effected, and that one of those three will one day or other be the fate of America, viz., by the legal voice of the people in Congress, by a military power, or by a mob. It will not always happen that our soldiers are citizens, and the multitude a body of reasonable men. Virtue, as I have already remarked, is not hereditary, rather it is perpetual. Should an independency be brought about by the first of those means, we have every opportunity and every encouragement before us to form the noblest, purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of the new world is at hand, and a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, are to receive their portion of freedom from the events of a few months. The reflection is awful, and is the point of view how trifling, how ridiculous to do the little paltry cavilings of a few weak or interested men appear, even weighted against the business of a world. Should we neglect the present favorable and inviting period, the independence be hereafter effected by any other means, we must charge the consequences to ourselves or to those rather whose narrow and prejudiced souls are habitually opposing the measure without either inquiring or reflecting. There are reasons to be given in support of independence, which men should rather privately think of than be publicly told of. We ought not know to be debating whether we shall be independent or not, but anxious to accomplish it on a firm, secure, and honorable basis, and uneasy rather that it is not yet began upon. Every day convinces us of its necessity. Even the Tories, if such beings yet remain amongst us, should, of all men, be the most solicitous to promote it. For as the appointment of committees at first protected them from popular rage, so a wise and well-established form of government will be the only certain means of continuing it securely to them. Wherefore, if they have not enough virtue to be Whigs, they ought to have prudence enough to wish for independence. In short, independence is the only bond that tie and keep us together. We shall then see our object, and our ears will be legally shut against the schemes of an intriguing as well as cruel enemy. We shall then, too, be on a proper footing to treat with Britain, for there is reason to conclude that the pride of the court will be less hurt by treating with the American states for terms of peace than with those whom she denominates rebellious subjects for terms of accommodation. It is our delaying in that encourages her to hope for conquest, and our backwardness tends only to prolong the war, as we have, without any good effect therefrom, withheld our trade to obtain a redress of our grievances. Let us now try the alternative, by independently redressing them ourselves, and then offering to open the trade. The mercantile and reasonable part of England will be still with us, because the peace with trade is preferable to war without it. And if this offer is not accepted, other courts may be applied to. On the grounds I rest the matter, and as no offer hath yet been made to refute the doctrine contained in the former editions of this pamphlet, it is a negative proof that whether the doctrine cannot be refuted, or that the party in favor of it are too numerous to be opposed. Wherefore, instead of gazing at each other with suspicious or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line which, like an act of oblivion, shall bury in forgetfulness every former dissension. Let the names of Whig and Tory be extinct, and let none other be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind, and of the free and independent states of America. Oh, that was it. That is common sense. Oh, my eyes. My eyes are hurting. My legs are hurting. My back's stiff. Oh. But I have read through it. I ain't going to discuss it long because I really need to rest. But anyway, of the presidentability of America, with some miscellaneous reflections. Paine talks about America's need to put together a navy. You know, he's talked about arming our country, but he's talked about America should put its own navy together. We can't depend on the king. Ships far out. If there are, marauders, if we are under attack, we more or less have to protect ourselves at this point. And America, it has the ability to manufacture everything needed. We need not import anything. And he's saying, but for some reason, our seaports, our shipwrights, they sit unused. We could have commerce through making a navy. You know, we have everything we need. We don't have to import. Everything is here in America. We have such a bounty. And we can't depend on England for, help. She's so busy protecting her other properties in the Mediterranean and Africa, and unfortunately he refers to Africa in a state of barbarism. I wouldn't say barbarism, just a difference of cultures. They may not, and we know they didn't perceive them as just as cultured. As he's saying here, he's saying Africa had such barbarism. He's even trying to use the mention of natives as savage as they are, is what he says. But again, it's just a matter of a different culture, which they saw as less than them. Yeah. And for some reason, this idea goes back to Roman and Greek times. The Greeks saw other countries as barbarous. Yeah, I think it's a Greek word, barbarian. Yeah, he's saying, and not only should we have our own navy, it just makes sense that the law, the governance, should come from upon the continent itself to govern itself. It just makes sense. And the people should be well represented. He makes an example of an event um, when the petition of the associators was before the House of Assembly of Pennsylvania. 28 members only were present. All the Bucks County members, being 8, so that's 8 of the 28 there, voted against it. And had 7 of the Chester members done the same, this whole province had been governed by 2 counties only. So yeah, altogether it'd be 15 people out of the 28. 15 over 13. So yeah, he's saying we need fair and equal representation, and we need to represent ourselves. And he wraps up with some points. He's saying expect no nations to be mediators. to serve as referees, or to be third parties between the two parties. So, to be a judge. The second one he mentions is the second one he mentions is the idea that other world powers, France and Spain, he mentions, don't expect them to offer assistance if you just want to reconcile with Great Britain, because that hurts them in the long run. They're not going to help you reconcile with Britain. So if you want their help, it can't be just to reconcile with Britain. The third one he mentions we must rid ourselves of the title of subjects of Britain and be considered rebels. And it can be a bit difficult if they are seen as rebels, because Britain wasn't the only one with territories it owned. It could also give the ideas to other groups to rise up, as the U.S. Revolution did. The French Revolution, not long after, took place. And lastly, let's see, let me read that here. Okay, yeah, he's saying we can no longer just reconcile with Britain, because we would be under their whim. Even if they said they would do something for us, we can't guarantee they would. And so he makes those 4 points. And ends that section, which in general ends the whole thing of common sense. But there is an appendix to this edition, which I also read. Oh, it's giving me a headache. He talks about, since the first edition of the pamphlet, or rather on the same day in which it came out, the King's Speech made its appearance in this city. The speech he refers to is a speech given by King George III to Parliament on October the 26th, 1775. And he calls on a crackdown of the colonies. So, yeah. and how they will how he intends to crack down. So, yeah. It was an address he made to Parliament on the 26th of October, 1775. And so he's showing that because of this speech, his pamphlet Common Sense shows even more, right on time words. Hmm. And he talks about how the King George III is very, his want to take down the American colonies a few pegs is the pride of tyrants. Um, he also refers. This is the part where he refers to the naked and untutored Indian is less savage than the King of Britain. Again, it's a matter of cultures, but at that time, it goes back to where, like I was talking about, Greek and Roman times, where they thought everybody else was barbarians. He talks about Sir John Dalrymple. Um, let's see, Sir John Dalrymple, who was the first Earl of Stair, Stair. So he was, related in royalty. He's also called Sir John Dalrymple. No, he wasn't the first Earl of Stair. We're looking for Sir John Dalrymple, 4th Baronet of Cousland, Cosland. He's the 4th Baronet and was a Scottish advocate, judge, chemist, and author. Best known for his memoirs of Great Britain and Ireland from the dissolution of the last Parliament of Charles II until the sea battle of La Hogue. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense because the other one was only alive, died in 1707. This one died in 1810, which would put him more in line with the time of the Revolution. So Sir Dalrymple. He's called the putative father of a whining Jesuitical peace that falsely called the address of the people of England to the inhabitants of the America. And then we have the real character of the present one. Okay. It says the address of the people of England to the inhabitants of America. But if you are inclined to pay compliments to an administration, which we do not complain of, it is very unfair if you it is very unfair in you to withhold from them that the prince, by whose not alone they were permitted to do anything. But yeah. He calls into question the character of Dalrymple, and he's saying, "Look, he's saying this. You cannot just." He's saying, with Dalrymple saying, you shouldn't. It's kind of hard to say what Dalrymple's saying. Inclined to pay compliments to an administration, which we do not complain of. It is very unfair in you to withhold from them that the prince, by whose not alone they were permitted to do anything. Yeah, maybe it's where my head's kind of spinning right now, but I'm kind of having trouble putting that together. But he also talks, which we do not complain of, and he has in quotations, meaning the Marquis of Rockingham at the repeal of the Stamp Act. Let's look up Marquis of Rockingham. So probably Charles Watson Wentworth, second Marquis of Rockingham. He was Viscount Hyam between 1733 and 1746. Earl Malton between 1746 and 1750. I ain't going to open up the full Wikipedia article. But apparently that's who it's referring to, the Marquis of Rockingham. Charles Watson Wentworth. Unless they're... Now I'm confused. Unless they're talking about Thomas Watson Wentworth, who seems to be the first Marquis of Rockingham, because Charles is listed as the second. Okay. Hmm. Okay. So I'm a bit confused on if it's Thomas or Charles. Um, but apparently one of them was um, he was over the repeal of the Stamp Act in Britain. He was the one who had to repeal it. So. Or maybe they're just talking about to administration, which we do not complain of. Yeah, that's all I can think of is that the administration of the Marquis of Rockingham was responsible for the repeal of the Stamp Act. And again, Paine makes the comparisons between reconciliation and independence and why independence makes the most sense. He says reconciliation, we are just opening ourselves up to trouble. He says the buckle of the continent is loose, in which he's talking about all the states are not united. They need to be united. Yeah, the continental belt is too loosely buckled. And he says, and if something is not done in time, it will be too late to do anything. And we shall fall into a state in which neither reconciliation nor independence will be practicable. Basically saying our chances at really forming a nation will be unlikely because every state will have different wants and needs. And he says we are past the point of reconciliation. He even makes the quotation, the Rubicon, quotes, the Rubicon is past, quotes. Basically saying we've already passed any possibilities of a friendly reconciliation. And he makes the point that we must either force Britain to recognize who we are as um, an economic force and gain our freedom that way so that they realize they have to trade and thus will give us independence. Or we must do it by force. But that'll be it for now. Common sense is done. These were long videos and they wore me out. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. And something new I want to say. I've gotten fed up with people lying and pushing falsehoods without showing their sources. So, next time you see crap, tell them, cite your sources. I'm doing it. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Until then, later.